All right. I'm going to try this solo podcast thing another time. This is Jeff Mayhew, and tonight, tonight we're going to talk a little Willy Wonka. My family and I watched the new movie, the Timothy Chalamet version, last night, and we just wanted to chat about it. Um, Then we're going to continue our political series on political parties. Um, we're going to talk about Jefferson and Madison, or we're gonna dive in deeper. So we gave kind of like an overview on the last podcast, and on this one, we're going to kind of dive in deeper at the beginning of those, like the Republican Party and the beginning of the Federalist Party and their leaders, Jefferson and Madison and Hamilton and Adams. And then in the last segment of the show, we are going to talk some no cap fund. For those of you who don't know, I am the president of East Coast operations for the No Cap Fund. We're an organization that is dedicated to uncapping the house. And I'm just kind of putting some things together, and I just want to talk about leadership and design and marketing and communication, because at its core, representation is communication. And so kind of just roll through that tonight. So let's get started with Willy Wonka. So this this movie pulls at my heartstrings because it's one from my youth, the original Willy Wonka, that is. It was it's a book, obviously, by Ronald Dahl that most kids read. I love the Gene Wilder version. Man, I must have watched that on VHS like 1,000 times when I was a kid. Um, I think like when you're a kid, you kind of just dream that you would be able to like go into a candy factory and like eat candy and then like own the candy factory, and then all of like the unique um, attributes about the candy factory, and the specialty gums and the specialty candies and the floating and all that stuff. It just really ties into a kid's imagination. So, as most, I was a big fan of that. So we saw that it was streaming on HBO, and I've got a wide array of children. It's hard to find a movie that we can watch together that's appropriate of and entertaining for all ages. And this movie was PG. My girls are 7 years old now, so I was like, man, this is perfect. I know that my teenagers will love this. I know I'm gonna love this. So it was a great movie. I highly recommend it. You should go out and watch it with your kids. I'm going to talk about just a few things. So, and spoilers if you haven't seen it. Just I'm trying not to ruin the movie, but there are some like things that I have to talk about that maybe give away big plot lines. So just keep that in mind when you're listening. Um, so at the beginning of the movie, this is a prequel to the original Willy Wonka, and Wonka is um, this young man with a dream, and he goes to the city essentially to make his dream come true. And he is a chocolatier, and he's a magician, and he is a salesman, and he is extremely talented at everything that he does. But he gets completely taken advantage of his first walk into the city. He comes in with 12, I believe it's 12 uh, coins. I can't remember what the terminology was in the movie now, but he comes in with 12 coins, and by the end of the night, he's got zero. He's giving them away to people who need them. He's paying for things he doesn't need. He's getting scammed all along the way. He's singing his dream and he's believing in tomorrow. And by the end of the night, he's got no money left, and he gets uh, taken in by this gentleman who brings him to his hotel. And they get him to sign a contract where he has to pay tomorrow. It's one coin. Again, I don't remember the terminology there, but he has to pay the one coin by tomorrow before he leaves. And he's confident that he's going to sell enough chocolate to be able to do that. And he signs this contract with him. Now, What we find out is the contract has some fine print to it. And he's warned about this, but he's so naive. He signs it anyways. He gets distracted by the sweet talk, if you will, of the hotel person, and he signs this contract, and he basically puts himself into servitude because they charged him for all of these things he didn't know about, things that he was actually given when he walked in the door. Like when he walks in, he's given a shot of gin and he's told to sit and warm himself by the fire. But when he gets his final bill and his final bills charged him an enormous amount of money for all of that stuff, but it wasn't given to him up front. It was all in the fine print. And oh, by the way, if you don't pay, you now have to work off your debt, and your debt is like 10,000 times what you or like so he has got 10,000 days to work off essentially. And so in a dungeon, a basement of you will, with other people who have been scammed into contract labor, and um they like wash clothes. I don't quite understand the business model there. But I don't think that's the important part of the movie. So like why do I want to talk about this? Well, it's hard not to draw the parallels between like contract labor and servitude and slavery. And so like where does where does some contract labor come from? Let's look back. Let me grab a book real quick. So Reconstruction, the after after the Civil War, the freedmen and the Southerners kind of have to like figure out how to make things work, because they the economic structure was gone now. And so, how do you pay the laborers, Um, and what happened, so let's start here. So this is, kind of the beginning. This is from 1874, and this is written by a Northern Republican in from New Orleans. And he writes, um, the laws of contract are the foundation of civilization. The contract ostensibly reconciled free choice and social order and epitomized the principle that legitimate systems of authority must rest upon consent rather than that legitimate. Oh, I'm reading the same line again. I'm sorry. And epitomize the principle that legitimate systems of authority must rest upon consent rather than coercion. By voluntarily signing and adhering to contracts, both planters and freedmen would develop the habits of a free labor economy and come to understand their fundamental harmony of interests. Now, that sounds good, right? It's like, okay, this makes sense. We have to be able to like, because you're not buying and selling immediately. You're working for a really long period of time for an end payoff of a crop. Sometimes the crop doesn't come out, and sometimes it's not your fault. And so you are going to put labor into an endeavor that people need, right? People need food to survive. How are you going to what is the incentive for a human being to do this if you aren't the one getting paid off, right? Like, why are you putting in your labor to feed a whole bunch of other people that you don't know, right? You could just take a smaller piece of land, make food for yourself, and, why take the risk, if there's no profit in it? And so this contract thing is kind of the way that we start to try to navigate this gap between unpaid labor and paid labor. And in its virtue, it sounds like a good thing, but in its reality and the reality of the South and the reality of corporations and the reality of what happened, it kind of took a turn for the negative. And it kind of like in Wonka, right? And so this this is from the same book I'm reading, the Reconstruction, Eric Foner, 1863, or America's Unfinished Revolution, 1863 to 1877. And so this is from page 165. It's a quote from, I have to look in the back to figure out, Benjamin Butler. I'll have to find out, but it's a quote. It says, contracts of this nature, when the landowner undertakes to control the personal liberty of the laborers, are utterly foreign to free institutions. And so what we saw happen is contracts were made to replace essentially slavery in a way, different, you know, um, but they were because they undertook to control personal liberty, right, by backing the laborer into a corner and giving them no choice. And that's kind of what happens here with Wonka, except he's deceived into signing that contract. But he has no choice but to fulfill it. Um, and so, why does this happen in the South? You know, let's see here. So this is talking about, you know, the big kind of problem was the planter class didn't want to change their economic structure, and it's because it worked for them, and they didn't really care that people were enslaved. And it's kind of you look at it and you go, you kind of disgusted by it, but this reality of the situation. And why do people do that? Besides like their moral failings, it's a matter of like convenience and what's easy. Human beings do what's easy, and if it's always been there, they kind of feel like it should always be there. Um, and so the planter classes would use their political power to prevent emergence of alternative economic enterprises that might threaten their control of the labor force. And so what that other economic enterprise was the corporation. And the corporation, after the Civil War, is able to move in to the southern markets and kind of take control in a lot of ways. Um, because the corporation was working with the southern economy before. They were the buyers of the selling of the South, the raw materials. They needed the raw materials for the manufacturers. So um, now the corporation is able to come in, expand its market, grow its economic uh, footprint in the nation, and along the way, it uses its power to you know to serve itself, to make sure that corporations are taken care of. And it's, I believe, and I didn't do enough research for this, but if you go back, I could pull out my, I don't have time to pull up my Supreme Court docs. I'll get down a rabbit hole. But I believe the first like Supreme Court case that references the 14th Amendment, which was, a post Civil War Reconstruction Amendment, right, for the freedmen, is a corporation. Okay. And so what we see is corporations and businesses come in and they take control of the market. They use their power. They create contracts that, in a lot of ways, are not advantageous to the laborer, and it I think it hurts Reconstruction in a lot of ways, because I think what would have been a really beautiful thing to see would have been, and there's a quote in here, and I'm not going to read it because it's pretty long, but it's essentially, it's somebody who was freed from after the Civil War, and they had been in bondage for most of their life for the same owner. And his argument was, they promised us 40 acres and a mule, and they didn't get any of it. And they should have gotten some of their owner's land, was his argument, because they worked it. Like that profit, they never got any of it. And if they could have, if there was a structure in place or a guidance in place to allow the uh, the freedmen to kind of form their own corporations in a way and their own businesses, which I know there was, it's not like it didn't happen. It was there, but it was in small segments and it wasn't wide enough and it wasn't protected enough because the white Southern governments were very adamant on trying to stomp out any type of like black economic, growth or any type of social growth at this time period. So obviously there's a lot of varying factors that go into this, but I just think that like it's not it's not to demonize the corporation. The corporation does what the corporation does. It's to say that we want more, we should have had more competing corporations between the mercantile interest, if you will. Is it the mercantile, the manufacturing interest, the industry interest versus the agrarian raw material, raw earth materials or whatever you want to call it, interest of the South, and to have basically to give the freedmen part ownership in that, along with the white Southerners, because ultimately that's what you needed. You needed a competing economic force or a stabilizing economic force, and because the white governments, the Confederate, the white Southerners who really just didn't like what happened, who were resentful and who didn't believe that blacks were equal to whites, they kind of got in their own way. And this allowed northern corporations, I think, to come down and um, take control because you needed economic stability if you were going to grow and take care of all these people that were free, and even the the white Southerners needed economic assistance as well because the whole structure was broken. And so when you when a society gives so much power to one side versus the other, there's always going to be corruption. There's always going to be interests that aren't going to be balanced. And I think that's what you see here. And that's why the modern corporation kind of, has so much power. And so, how do we bring that back to Wonka, right? So, we talked about Wonka gets signed into a bad contract. He's trying to sell chocolate, and he finds out that he can't sell chocolate without a store. And there is this chocolate cartel. They're basically three separate corporations that are working in harmony to block out their competition, and they're bribing local law enforcement to enforce rules that make it harder for a laborer, if you will, a freedman, a individual, somebody who is new to the marketplace, to participate in the marketplace. Um, and so that's Wonka's challenge now. Is now he's basically he in one way he works for a modern corporation because he has to do his 9 to 5, and then he's working a side gig trying to like hawk chocolate, but the local government's trying to do everything they can to keep him out of the marketplace and making it harder for him to participate. Um, and somehow Wonka prevails. Through this whole thing, Wonka prevails. I mean, it's a sequel, it's a prequel, so Wonka prevails because otherwise there wouldn't have been a. So not really spoiling anything there, but like, let's talk about why does Wonka prevail? And Wonka prevails because he inspires. Like people believe in what he is going to accomplish because he believes in what he's going to accomplish, and he's got the he's got the chops to back it up. Like he's not out there just talking the talk and showing off to people. He's bringing like the best chocolate anybody's ever eaten ever. He has made this a lifelong passion. He puts in the study and the practice and the work before he showed up to make his pitch because he knew that when he was ready to make his pitch, he wanted to be good to go, right? Like when he walks into the city and he starts his endeavor, he is so confident that he is going to be successful. Now, along the way, he doesn't understand, he's naive, if you will, to how corrupt and problematic it's going to be, going into this. But he doesn't let that get him down. Um, there is a moment, there is a moment in the movie where he is ready to give up. But all of the people that believed in him, that were following him, wouldn't let him because he had changed their mind. They had already given up. They were content in their 9 to 5 uh, contract labor job, and they saw him. They tasted his chocolate. They saw the magic, and he inspired their dreams. And he inspired them to believe that it could happen. And even when he failed and he wanted to give up, they wouldn't let him. They said, "No, I believe in you." And this is like that's like the success story there, right? Like the American success story is like uh the American Revolution was a whole bunch of people who didn't want to become this other group of people's labor. Um, and they didn't want to be taxed. They didn't want to be paying for other things. And they wanted a say in the conversation. They wanted ownership in it. Um, and we were scrappy and we were persistent and we were confident in what we were doing because we had principles and beliefs about governments and how they should function and operate in a worldly setting. And we didn't give up. And, France believed in us. And and we were able to and it's funny because like look at France, right? Like France believed in us and then they tried to replicate what we did. They didn't do such a good job. But like it is very similar to the American story, that Wonka story. So anyways, I really enjoyed the movie. Excuse me. Get a sip here. You ever get like just like a bitter dry thing in the back of your throat just out of nowhere? Or is it just me because I talk for like hours at a time without even breathing? Um, so yeah, it was a great movie, very enjoyable. The kids loved it. My 14-year-old daughter loved it. My 7-year-olds loved it. My son loved it. My wife liked it. I loved it. I don't know, maybe my wife loved it. I forgot to ask her. I asked everybody else. um, but yeah, so let's move on to the next segment here. So last week we talked about political parties and we kind of got an overview of the anti-federalist and the federalist and then the transition to the new government, the new constitution, and the beginning of the new federalist and the republicans. And so um this week I'm doing this little tank talk thing. I think by the time this thing airs, I would have already done it. It's going to be Monday night at Heritage Brewing. And for this, I'm kind of studying James Thomas Jefferson. You can see the guy right there. And I'm reading this other book on him, which is right over here. And it kind of like it really talks about the beginning of the those two parties, the Republicans and the Federalist, and specifically like how their leaders brought them about. So originally, Madison was kind of the leader of the Republicans, and I think he's very much remembered as the leader of the Republicans. But um, Jefferson really has a heavy hand in creating this movement and this party. And it's important to understand that these parties were born out of a belief of government, like of how government should function. So both the Republicans and the Federalists did believe in a strong central government. There's a great quote in here. It's by the author, not Thomas Jefferson, but there's a great line in here, is what I should say, that says something to the effect of Thomas Jefferson believed in, I can't remember, but he's a strong, a limited executive, but a strong executive, right? And so it's not to say that Republicans don't believe in central government. It's that it's kind of the chart that I drew yesterday. The Congress, or last week, the Congress, the bicameral Congress is kind of above the executive, if you will. And the Federalist was the believed in a strong executive and a judiciary. And so you kind of see this starting to evolve in Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton's stories. And Jefferson is this, I think they both, Jefferson and Hamilton, are both these very passionate figures. Jefferson is more controlled in the fact that, like, he is more diligent about keeping his passions under wrap. While he's an engaging conversationalist and a eloquent writer, he doesn't actually like take up the pen or do the speaking, deliver the speeches the way that Hamilton and Madison did. Madison and Hamilton really took up the pen. Um, Jefferson was not known for his oratory, um, but he is remembered for being a skilled conversationalist. So I wonder what the reason is. I think, from reading some of his stuff, my guess is he knew how partisan the world was. And so let me pull out the book here for a second. And so let's see here. Chapter 17. So one of the things that started to drive a division um, was geography and economic interests. Um, and so one of the things that happened was the John Jay had negotiated a treaty which um, sacrificed Southern and Western interests for those of the Northeast. Um, and Madison and Jefferson are, obviously against this. And because it's a treaty that's negotiated by the federal government and it's affecting local, smaller, um, the individual essentially. Um, let's see here. So, be patient with me. I'm sorry. Another reason was Jefferson was a free trade guy. So was a lot of the Republicans, um, because, and they were worried about becoming, um, I don't know, dependent on the British. And so Jefferson, as an individual, believed that the citizenry would, and this is a line from the book here, the citizenry would naturally divide itself to some extent into two groups. And Madison talks about this in, not specifically two groups, but just like the division of people and interest in society. And so I don't think that it's people divide themselves into two groups. I think what it is that people are a multiplicity of groups and they funnel themselves down into two groups to achieve their goals. It's stacking power on top of power on top of power. And so, what were those two groups, and how were they originally formed? Well, the two groups were the Republicans and the Federalist, and essentially, the Republicans were the popular party or the people party. They were your farmers and small industry people, and the Federalists were your wealthier businesses, your aristocrats, if you will. And Hamilton very much pushed government policies that benefited those individuals, the small group of individuals. And Republicans, in a lot of ways, kind of fought against it. And that's where these two divisions were formed. And so, how another way, like, so those are your interests. Your interests are those of the people, the common people, if you will, and then the interest of the wealthy. Okay. And remember, Plutarch, Plutarch said the greatest disease of all republics, and I'm paraphrasing this, so please fact check me. Um, is the division between rich and poor. So immediately off the bat, you have this republic that's born, and the parties have essentially created themselves into a capital party and a labor party. And so the capital party was the Federalist, and the Labor Party was the Republicans. And so that's the interest of the two parties. And so what defines a party is the interest of the party, and then the belief or structure of the ends of the party. Like, how are they going to achieve their goal? And so the Republicans sought to achieve their goal through Republican government. Okay. And that is what we were founded on. That's what our Constitution is. And to that end, it is a Congress with a bicameral Congress that has a a voice for the people. And then they also believed in the state governments because they believed that the state governments were um, that secondary layer, as we talked about on the last show, is like we are a layered republic, and the layers check each other, the federal and the state, just the same way that the divided powers of the republic check themselves. And so it's interesting because Jefferson's belief in government, and he, talking about how government should function and the way it should work, he actually cited, um, according to this, Federalist number 28, which was ironically written by Hamilton. And it says, it may safely be received as an axiom in our political system that the state governments will, in all possible contingencies, afford complete security against invasions of the public liberty by the national authority. Projects of usurpation cannot be masked under pretenses so likely to escape the pretension of select bodies of men as the people at large. The legislatures will have better means of information. They can discover the danger at a distance, and possessing all the organs of civil power and confidence of the people, they can at once adopt a regular plan of opposition in which they can combine all the resources of the community. They can readily communicate with each other in the different states and unite their common forces for the protection of their common liberty. And so this is in a chapter about the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, or excuse me, Jefferson's thought about the Aliens and Sedition Acts leading up to the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. And so he's quoting Hamilton, and he's talking about the state governments. And so if we fast forward to the Virginia and the Kentucky resolutions, Thomas Jefferson comes out and basically coins the phrase nullification, and that's the states can nullify federal law. And Madison kind of comes out, and he's a little bit more tame. He said the states can interpose, and then kind of, if they agree, they should work through the federal Congress, through the people's house, to make the necessary changes. Um, but again, this establishes the Republican thought process of how to govern and how to achieve their means of what their interests are. And so we look on the flip side of that, and the Federalist and Hamilton, and they were, the faction, the faction of the Federalists, the High Federalists or the Hamiltonians, the ones that were leading the charge. They really believed in a strong executive and a judiciary. Okay, and so, or that's what they used to achieve their means. They were able to make arguments and persuade them that naturally it was in the executive's purview and interest to act for the national good, for these large, sweeping economic policies that united the nation. And look, with some of these things, there is there is strength in what they did, in creating the economic system and kind of uniting the states together. You know, I think it was more the means to which it was achieved, that was harmful, in a lot of ways to the young republic. And so Hamilton himself he is this tour de force, and that's kind of what the Federalists were, is this force party. I mean, and then there's this whole thing between, the Federalists kind of break up almost, if you will, because of the opposing forces inside of their own faction between Adams and Hamilton. And that is, if you look at it and you say, okay, if you are a political party and you are trying to use the executive and the judiciary to achieve your means, you are a party of force. And if you are a party and you're trying to use Congress and the state governments, the legislatures, it's essentially two Congresses, as um, a means to achieve your ends, then you are a persuasion party. One party involves all the people because it's a people party who just wants to have a conversation and have a seat at the table and a vote in the decision making, and a party of, you know well off individuals who want to use their money and wealth and power to force legislation through the executive and the judiciary. And you saw this is, I mean, how does our government work today? A lot of what goes through, and this is my argument. My modern day argument is we do not have a Republican Party, and we have not had a Republican Party for a really, really long time. And that is because we don't have a party that's actually working through the Congress and the state governments. A lot of it is push through the executive, push it through. Let's line up the three powers, the bicameral Congress and the executive together. Let's try to get it through. If it gets challenged by the Supreme Court, they'll either, sign off of it and make it into law, or they'll kick it back and we'll try it again some other time. And um, it's, we both Republicans and Democrats do this nowadays. It is, what I say is we have the Federalist blue and the Federalist red. We've got the John Adams Federalist and we've got the Alexander Hamilton Federalist. We do not have any Jefferson or Madison Republican Party, not even close to it. Um, and that's a problem for people. Like for That's a problem for us, regular people. There is a reason that we designed our government this way. There was a reason that these men took up these causes and made the choices that they made, because they had learned and studied and experienced all these different things of, and they had chosen the things that were important to stand up for. And so we see this very clearly in the XYZ affair, because Hamilton is his favorite. And I think, like, this is my favorite story to tell about Hamilton, is his favorite leader is Julius Caesar. And it's in this book somewhere. It's in a lot of books. Because like anytime a leader's like, hey, You know that dictator from Rome? Yeah, he's number one in my book. Like, I feel like you should just be like, we need to rethink this guy. And again, there is a lot of virtue in Hamilton. There's a great quote in here from Jefferson where he's saying, I can't trust him as a politician, but I can trust him as a man. And he he believes that he's a virtuous individual, but when he gets into government, he believes that he will use whatever power he can achieve to his end. And again, this is like that is to say that you can do whatever you want to your political opponents. And there's, you know, get back to the XYZ affair here. So the XYZ affair takes place during the Adams administration with this dispute between France and the United States. It's kind of sending the United States and France towards war. There's a naval buildup. There is um, Hamilton is kind of given the standing army, if you will, working through Washington. Um, he there's these three administrators. I'm sorry. I did not brush up on the XYZ affair enough before I started this conversation to tell you the whole backstory of the XYZ affair. So let me give you the very brief overview. Basically, there was these papers that proved this thing that Thomas Jefferson was trying to use against uh, John Adams. Thomas Jefferson is John Adams' vice president, okay? And he's a Republican. And he very much miscalculates um, how not partisan John Adams is. In fact, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson at this period of time are probably closer in what they believe in government than Alexander Hamilton and John Adams. But Alexander Hamilton is the leader of the Federalist Party, and at this point in time, Thomas Jefferson has become a hard partisan for his side. And he kind of, even though he's friends with John Adams, he has this blind spot because of his partisanship. And so he goes, or he is, the whole Republican crew kind of pushes for the release of the XYZ papers. And it proves the Adams administration's very honest and balanced handling of the situation. And it shows the partisanness of it. And this is and I apologize for not getting the specifics in the story here because like I said, I didn't brush the words up on that. But the point of this story to understand about, you know, why do we have two different parties and how do parties gain and maintain power? Well, this is illustrated beautifully here. They go too far. They don't remain moderate. Okay. And so in both examples of the Hamiltonians or the high Federalist handling of the situation, where they're essentially pushing for war because it gives them more power. Because Hamilton, this guy that loves Caesar, he's in control of the army and he wants to do all these things and he doesn't like the French and he likes the British. And he sees this as an opportunity to grow his faction and to grow his party and to advance his interests. And Thomas Jefferson and the Republicans in Madison, they see Hamilton and they assume that Adams is of Hamilton's belief. They don't talk to him. Thomas Jefferson is his vice president and they don't have a conversation. Like they don't like sit in the same room and like try to iron these things out. They make assumptions about what the other one believes and then they attack each other. And so the Hamilton makes the mistake of going so far partisan and advancing and trying to, the Aliens and Sedition Acts, which again, Hamilton and Adams weren't the ones that wrote them. Adams did sign off on them, and Hamilton probably would have gone for stronger ones. Let's face it. I mean, Hamilton used the power of the press through his wealthy connections to advance the Federalist cause and spread the message. And the Republicans did the same thing in a different way. But they he he overplayed his hand, if you will. And John Adams is this moderating force in the whole situation, who is really, I mean, talk about, I know that it's hard to rank presidents and like best to least and all that stuff. And so with John Adams, like he just doesn't get enough credit as president. And this keeping us out of war with France is just so impressive. Like you want to study foreign policy and like how to handle those situations. John Adams is a great one to study here. And he is the moderating, balancing force in this whole episode that keeps us out of war. And Thomas Jefferson does a lot of harm. I mean, in the short run and kind of long, in the short run, he wins the day because the Federalists are defeated. The Republicans look like winners, and Jefferson ends up becoming president. But in the long run, he does a lot of harm to his cause or to the Republican cause because that division is drawn between him and Adams, who Adams was way closer to a Republican. And even you fast forward and John Quincy Adams becomes the president of the United States, and he works underneath of James Monroe, a Republican president, and is essentially a Republican. I'd have to look it up, but I think I can't ever remember if he was like Whig or Republican. I can't remember what party he was at that period of time. It was kind of fuzzy. But so John Adams is way closer to a Republican. He's this balancing, moderating voice. He really doesn't want to go to war with France. Jefferson completely misunderstands the situation. He and the Republicans attack John Adams relentlessly. They don't give him enough credit. They don't have conversations with him. And so that division that is made hurts the Republicans in the long run because John Adams on his way out the door, yeah, he tried to, he loads the judiciary with Federalists, because how do Federalists want to get things done? They want to get things done through the executive and the judiciary. And so this makes it difficult. This is where, battle lines get drawn and how things are going to get done in the future. And it tilts power. It, it, it it doesn't tilt power because the Republicans kind of, as a party, kind of take off. Hamilton dies, and the Federalists kind of disappear, but the Federalist power remains in the judiciary. Um, and so there's a lot of things that take place in the Supreme Court cases that kind of start to build towards the Civil War and start to build towards the capital and later labor issues that we had in the industrial age with corporations. And so this is where a lot of that stems. And again, it goes back to political parties. It goes back to interest and principles. The interest was people versus money, essentially, rich and poor, as Plutarch would put it, and it principles of government of the people, by the people, for the people, or a government of the rich and powerful, which is the executive and the judiciary. Because not everybody has the money to speak to the president, and not everybody has the money to hire a lawyer or you know uh, speak to judges and whatnot. And so it is that separating factor. And again, if we try to overlay it, like how does it affect us today? What is it relevant to us today? We don't have a Republican Party. We just don't. And we as people should want one, and we should want one that is uh, balanced on Republican virtues and Republican interest and Republican principles. All right. So let's go to where are we at here? Let's go to the last segment of the show here. So for this, I'm going to go through just a little slideshow I put together. And talk about um, the no cap fund. What I'm trying to build over there. Um, Try to use this as like a little training video for those no cap fans that are come to our Twitter spaces, who have signed up to be state leaders, so they can kind of watch this. It's just like a means of communication, if you will. So let me share my screen. All right. So this is essentially a grassroots um, marketing package of what I'd like to produce and send out to state leaders. So first thing is we'd want to send out a leadership guide. The leadership guide is it would have an explanation of leadership in there, kind of like just defining what leadership is, along with a leadership checklist. Um, Leadership in a lot of ways is trying to balance like passion with moderation. Like you're really passionate about what you want to do, but you got to have structure and order and take little steps to achieve that passion. And so inside the leadership guide, we'd have step one, how to build a group. Step two, how to network. And maybe these are out of order. I'm just kind of, just kind of building this out. So I haven't finished it yet, but how to network, working with business groups, setting up farmers markets and town events, and then how to order marketing supplies. And we're going to go through some of those marketing supplies here. Um, and, you know, the what you see here, or what we're trying to achieve, is communication. Because at the core, what I like to tell people is like the House of Representatives is communication. It is the people's voice. It's the way that people talk to their power. And so if we're going to have an organization that's dedicated to uncapping the House of Representatives and giving people the ability to speak again, then we have to be diligent and concise communicators. And so the first part of communication comes in your marketing material. It comes with your design. And so like the key to good design is size, shape, and color. As you can see in the designs that are coming up, very conscientious about the coloring, having nice space between things so it's easily be able to read, and having color that pops the right things. And the key to good marketing, which, look, what a grassroots organization needs is good marketing to spread its word, um, is simplicity, consistency, and focus. And so, um, what we want is we want our focus to be on communication and education. Okay. And that's where this stuff comes in. So we're looking for 435 state leaders, one leader per House district. And a leader would receive a marketing package with the stuff that you see here, along with additional things. So business cards, pop up banners, stickers, yard signs, t-shirts. Start this over again. Um, and so in each of these, we have what I've tried to do is I've tried to create a design that feels comfortable. It ties to history in many different ways. So if you look at the text that's selected here and the colors that are selected here with your Y435, the reason that it's in that font, that's like our founder's font, right? And it ties into that old-timey feel of the founding era. And the reason for that is because when you ask people, why do you think we have 435 representatives? The answer that you will most commonly get before they think about it is, well, it's always been that way. But they very quickly realize that there was not nearly as many people or states during the founding. And they go, whoa, whoa, wait, you're right. Why is it 435? And that is your way as a state leader, as anybody who's trying to like make this their mission to complete and uncap the house. That's your in, right? And so we want the design and we want the marketing to always be communicating something. So the yellow and the red and the blue, obviously the red and the blue represents Republican and Democrats, right? There's no way around that, but I've chosen a lighter blue than the traditional one. This kind of reminds me of like 1960s era, um, Republican and Democrats. And just to tie into that familiar feel of different eras of history, because, you know, we are trying to do something that requires knowledge of history to understand. And so right here you see this is just a template. I haven't This is not what I would be sending out to state leaders. This is just something I kind of threw together quickly, but the point of this here is to set a goal, right? We're essentially, what we're trying to do is we're balancing power between the Federalist and the Republicans. We don't have Republicans, right? We can't have Republicans until we uncap the House, because the Republicans are the party of the people, the House is the party of the people, and the people don't have a place to speak. So what we want to do is we want to balance the power, okay? Because we don't want to follow Plutarch's path of that disease, that division between rich and poor. We want to balance it, pull the rich and poor closer together so they can work in harmony and continue our great American experiment of liberty. And so you can see here that what what I like is, and it doesn't have to be 400,000 a ratio. I'd like to see uncapping the house happen by 2030. That's when we take the next census. And as an organization, we need to have a goal to achieve. And so the next census, we have 4 house election cycles. So our focus as an organization should be educating people about why the House of Representatives needs to be uncapped by 2030, and making sure that we are pushing that as an issue for people to run on in Congress and to persuade people that are already in Congress to talk about this issue. Um, we want to be able to have state leaders um, go out and talk directly to the people. And so inside, that How the Network, we talked about business groups, farmers markets, and town events. We will give you a marketing packet with all this stuff. There'll also be like a tablecloth, maybe a tent. You can sign up. There'll be inside of your leadership guide, there'll be a um, explain to you where to look to sign up for town events, farmers markets, and stuff like that. Um, and you'll go out and you'll just talk to people about it. We'll have communication cards, we'll have brochures, we'll have pamphlets. Um, and that way you can start to educate people on their power, essentially, and what they should want their government to be focused on. Um, and remember, what we need to focus on is good communication. And good communication is simple, focused, and informational. So when we're out there and we're designing something, we like this is a focused design, right? We want to uncap the house. We want it to be a campaign issue for 2030, right? Because it's going to be a campaign issue year after year, but that's the year that the census is taken, right? And so here again with our design, we've got something that feels comfortable because it's like the Reagan Bush logo. And we've seen it with Lincoln and Johnson. We've seen it with Washington and Adams. And so we've kind of replicated the design there. We put this up in your front yard. People are going to go, they're so tired of Republican and Democrats. And this looks like a political ad. It feels like a political ad, but nobody is going to understand it. But you know what they're going to want? They're going to want to ask questions about it. they're going to want to go to www.nocapfund.org, and they're going to want to find out more. And when they do find out more and they read the educational, informational, uh, the education, that's a little redundant, right? I thought we said concise. Okay. So when they read the information on the website and they learn about why we need to uncap the house, they're going to want to put one of these signs in their yard. And then whoever's running for president is going to need to pay attention to this issue. And most specifically, what we want to do is we want to get the people of Congress paying attention to the issue. I kind of already explained the Y435 t-shirt, didn't I? Kind of went out of order here. But again, we want to drive people to think. We want to drive people to ask questions. I think that if we want to get people in power to take us seriously as an organization, and let me stop the share real quick. If we want to get people in power to take us seriously and basically dilute their power, because you got to think, if you're a member of Congress and you write an apportionment bill that increases the size of the House, you lose your power. You lose some of your power. The Speaker of the House now has to write new rules, and there's new challenges with that. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this, into the nitty-gritty of understanding it. And the people that are in power aren't going to want to do the work, and they're not going to want to give up their power unless they are persuaded to do so by the people. And if the people want to persuade them, they need to come at them with an intelligent, concise argument. And that's what we want to do from top down at Uncap the House. We want to be able to give people the tools to make the change in government that needs to be made. Um, and, I think it's important to remember that, going back to that, in our last segment about the political parties, is how does a Republican government work? How does a Republican party supposed to work? And that is a government that works through the Congress, that works through the people, um, and that represents the interest of the individual citizen. And, this is something that has made has separated, I think, individuals from their government. I think it's a lot of the reason why we have a lot of the corruption in government that we see. I think it's a lot of the reason that people feel powerless, they feel unrepresented, and that's because they don't have any power. They aren't really represented. And so we don't need to be bitter and upset and angry over it when we're communicating about it. We just need to explain what's going on. And we shouldn't be mad at the people that are in power. They didn't do this. This isn't their fault. And they are going to disagree with us, and we shouldn't be angry at them disagreeing with us because you'll have to understand, if you take a state leadership position and you learn all this stuff, and if you're following this, you probably already understand why we need to uncap the House. But you have to think about it from the perspective of, like, what did you think before you knew about it, right? Like, when you first heard about it, you probably were like, what? This is silly. No, and then when you studied it and you learned it, you were like, oh, this is really important. I should be focusing on this. And so that's how we have to approach communicating about this. We need to be patient with people. We need to forgive people. Like I said, the people in power, they didn't do this. We should forgive them. We should be patient with them in communicating our message and just being persistent and concise and educational along the way, um, to make sure that we grow a group large enough to make this change, because I think it's really important for our republic. Um, yeah. So I think that's my show, guys. Thank you for the no cap people. If you signed on to listen to that little, you know, demonstration of marketing ideas. And thank you for my regular podcast crew for tuning in. I I'm still not sure what I'm doing, to be honest with you, with this new podcast format. So if you are watching and you have, uh, my thing is what I like to tell people is the way that I operate is like I'm like a flower. Okay, I grow towards light. You can put me in shade and you can tell me all the things that I do wrong, but I might just wither away and die if you do that. But if you just point a light at me, I naturally will follow it. And what I mean by that is if you're watching the show and you have positive things that I'm doing well that you think I should continue on, share it with me. If there are things that you think that I'm not doing well, point me in the direction of how to do it well instead of pointing out what I'm doing wrong. I think that we're all children in some way, and I'm a child in that way. And so that's the way I function and operate. So if you are listening and you're like, "Hey, I like this new format. He should keep doing this, but maybe he should switch it to do this or maybe make this change or whatever." Please make a comment, shoot me an email. If you're listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube, go in, drop something polite and nice into the comments. If you got questions that are political thing, about the political parts or whatever, drop them in there. I'll try to answer as many as I can, just to help, get viewership up, educate people, share the information. It was great talking with you again. It is weird talking alone in a room with nobody. Like I said, it is scary to go it alone, but here I am, and I'm looking for a whole bunch of other leaders to go it alone in their community and uncap the House and return Republican government back to the United States Republic. So, thank you for listening, and as always, peace and love.